Check. So, hi all, I'm Balaji Lakhsmanan. I'm the co-founder and CTO with Dvara E-Dairy. Thanks all for showing up to this Spark session. I think it is being kick-started after a while, and it's sort of always good to have cross-learning across different teams. Thanks all for showing up, whosoever are here, and thanks for all those who are joined online. Glad to present on the dairy sector and some of the things that Dvara E-Dairy is working on. Next slide. So, yeah, so we have a fairly large vision to essentially provide a trusted platform for the dairy space, especially from the Indian context. So, interestingly, when we look at rural, I think agriculture takes a lot of mind space, right? So we always think a lot of occupation in the rural is primarily in agriculture, which is also true. But dairy as such, when we see, India, interestingly, has got the highest cattle population in the world. We have, roughly more than 300 million plus cattle that we have. And across the world, let's say in Africa, there are a lot of cattle, Brazil. These are all some of the places where a lot of small, medium farmers especially have rare cattle, and their earnings depend on the cattle as such. And if we just look at previous slide, so if we look at the contribution to the GDP, about 4% is being contributed by the dairy sector, and it is growing at the rate of about 8 to 10% a year. And about 26% of the agriculture GDP is being contributed by the dairy sector, right? And about 1/3 of the farmer household income also depends on the dairy and income from the dairy in that sense. Next slide. So Dvara E-Dairy as a whole, on a summary basis, what we essentially do is we provide Surabhi loan, which is a variation of the cattle loan. It's a true cattle loan in that sense. I'll give some more inputs on as we go forward. And then we provide cattle insurance, which is simple, easy, digital, and true. And besides that, we also have a Dvara Surabhi app where a whole bunch of features, including wet on call, as well as ordering mineral mixture or checking the cattle health. All those things are available as part of the app. Next slide. So let's look at fundamentally, so while looking at the different problems in the dairy space, one of the key things that we were looking at is the identity of the cattle. I think all of us know the impact of how Aadhaar has redefined a lot of things, how it has made simple. For example, in some sense, it was very hard to prove that I'm Balaji, for example. Right? Probably I can show you some ID card, right? But who knows, right? It can be tamperable in that sense, right? And a whole bunch of things. Who knew that? Probably, I'm sure some of you here, you'd have got your SIM cards using your Aadhaar, right? All your KYCs are done, eKYCs, simply based on Aadhaar, and OTP has revolutionized things, right? So similarly, when it comes to the identity of the cattle, next slide. Next. So typically the cattle are identified based on the ear tags. This is the standard and usual. You go to the rural, you find a cattle, most of them will have a ear tag, yellow color, and then there'll be some number, right? Next slide. And of course, since they were tamperable, people were looking at, can we use injectable RFID tags? But of course, it comes with its own challenges in terms of the supply chain. It is also invasive in that sense. You need trained personnel. I know enough people who had cut their fingers because of the, because the device that is used for injecting is sort of very sharp because it needs to go intravenous in that sense. Next slide. So, but interestingly, just like for all of us, our fingerprint is unique, right? Cattle, and in some sense, most of the animals in that sense. This is applicable for goat, sheep, camel, even dogs in that sense. So they have a portion between the nostrils called muzzle. And you can see the patterns between the nostrils. So these patterns are unique to each cattle by design, by nature, by biometric, just like our fingerprint. So this has been there for a fairly long time. There are enough histories where, for example, just like we used to take a ink pad and put our fingerprint, ink paper with the muzzle pattern used to be collected and things like that. And there have been enough research papers where people used DSLR cameras to take the muzzle and then probably a couple of hundreds of muzzles and then, came out with an algorithm to sort of match and things like that, very limited. So what we have done is we have leveraged this muzzle and essentially built a mobile app, Android mobile app, where this muzzle can be captured and it is simple, easy, and this is used for the matching, right? So a couple of interesting things that we have developed, when all of us have gone to register our Aadhaar, it is a fairly simplistic space, right? There is a device with a built-in light. You put your finger on top, right? It is a fairly enclosed place, right? So the image processing and other things is fairly straightforward in that. But in a real world, when there's cattle on the field, there can be an n number of variations in terms of the lighting conditions. The animal also moves its head and things like that, right? So what we have done is we have designed an algorithm where first the algorithm will identify that whether it is a muzzle or not, right? And then whether the quality of the frame, that is of the muzzle, is whether it is a good image or a bad image. And if it is a good, it will automatically capture, it will automatically crop, and then it will take. Next slide. Yeah, so here is a video for example, a real world. And it also takes into consideration when the animal moves automatically, enough things can happen. And there is also feedback for the user in that sense. For example, there is mucus or water droplets which gets collected on the muzzle. So if it is so required to wipe the muzzle and things like that. So the system, what it does is, it boxes the muzzle, it identifies that it's a muzzle, it takes the image, it automatically crops it, right? Next slide. So it rejects the non-muzzle, it rejects the low light or the dirty images, it provides the feedback. Similarly, for example, if the angle is bad, it'll again reject, and then it helps the user to sort of move the mobile in such a way that the images can be easily captured. And of course, we have developed also the technology in terms of whether it is an actual cattle on the field or is it a digital image, right? Because people can essentially take a digital image of the muzzle and then say that this is my cattle in that sense. Next slide. And we have done a whole bunch of analytics on top in terms of how do you uniquely identify each of the muzzle, try and do a lot of image processing on top, and some deep learning on top. Next slide. So, and there are whole different types of muzzles that are there. For example, this is a pigmented muzzle. So there is a variation in the color of the muzzle and things like that. And it accounts for the color, the orientation, all this. So similar to Aadhaar, the process is the same. So every time a cattle is captured with the muzzle, a number is generated, and during the testing, right? The image of the muzzle is captured, the number is entered, and it will come back with a match or a no match, just like Aadhaar in that sense. Next slide. So one of the key applications of this is insurance. We have more than 30,000 plus cattle which have been insured. Here is a sample of an actual cattle which has been insured, and the muzzle was used for providing the settlement. So here you can see, previous slide. So you can see the cattle almost looks the same. In fact, this is an interesting sample where the horns of the cattle were also painted the same color, right? The ear tag obviously was the same. They have sort of changed it, but the muzzle being biometric is different. So this is a case saved. So already we have saved about 39 plus insurances which would have got settled, unless it is for muzzle, right? In typical case scenario, people look at the images, they look at the ear tag, and then they settle the claims, right? So now with this, this can sort of redefine the way insurance is done. And All this is done through the app, so it can also be completely digital in that sense. So there is no need for somebody to come and tag the cattle or somebody to come and do the RFID. So I'm sure all of us do the insurance for our vehicles, right? It takes not more than about 2 minutes, right? In the same way, as we go forward, once the muzzle ID is there, it should not take more than a couple of minutes for insurance or reinsuring the cattle in that sense, right? And beyond all this, when it comes to the identity, in the rural space, especially people who have been there, the value of the cattle is more than enough pieces of land, right? So, but a piece of land is considered an asset, right, for the farmer, but cattle is not. But if you look at the cattle, it also gives an OPEX income. It creates more, it creates a calf which can potentially give milk, right? So all these things are there, but it is not an asset, right? So, so there is definitely a place and scope where once the muzzle identity like this is there, so we are working with multiple governments. We've also done pilots with the NDDB, which is National Dairy Development Board. So where the muzzle ID can be connected to the Aadhaar of the farmer, right? So now, given that there is a unique ID which is non-tamperable and biometric, there is an asset identification, and in some sense, this can also become a true asset for the farmer, which he can leverage, right? So this is what we do as well, while giving the true cattle loan, right? So, as we go forward, we will show. Next slide. So the other sort of tech stack that we have built is identifying the health status of the cattle just by using an image of the cattle and a couple of data points. Next slide. So I'm sure, let's say all of us do probably a blood test or do a BMI check and things like that, right? Next slide. So just a couple of data points of the cattle in terms of, probably whether it's a cow or a buffalo, and then just one image, a back view of the cattle. And similarly, this also knows whether it's a back image, it will reject a non-back image and things like that. And then once this is uploaded, it will come back with a result of red, amber, green in terms of its health, along with some indications of the health, right? Next slide. And so this essentially helps the farmer to understand what is the current status of my cattle. Should I do something, right? So it's like a first health check in that sense. So the same system, we have also made it available as part of WhatsApp as well. So if you just send a hi, so all the farmers can essentially sort of go step by step and provide the images, and it will sort of give back the result in terms of the health of the cattle. Of course, we also take other inputs in terms of any other product interest that they have. Next slide. So, so this is another tool again, which is also being used by the farmer for checking the health of the cattle, and similarly during insurance. Right now, it is just left to the last mile person or the farmer who decides any cattle that he wants to insure. So now, before doing the insurance, it can be used for anti-selection, right? Which insurance company would want to insure a cattle which has a bad health, right? So this typically only for the amber and green cattle, the insurance is essentially given for the cattle. Next slide. So this is the Surabhi score. So we were talking about the Surabhi loan. If we typically look at the cattle loan that is being given in the industry right now, in some sense, it is cattle loan in name only. It is typically a personal loan, right? They do the same sort of KYCs for the farmers, do the health, sort of the credit check and all that, verify the standard set of things. The flow is exactly same for a personal loan and a cattle loan. And typically in the rural, what happens is the same set of cattle is used by like 20 different people for getting the cattle loan, right? So all of you remember the ID, right? So what we do is we use the ID so that the same cattle doesn't come again for cattle loan. That is one. Second thing is, what we have done is, given that it is a cattle loan, right? The dairy capability of the farmer, the way the cattle's health is maintained, the revenue from the milk proceeds, right? All that is very important to decide to give the cattle loan, so that it becomes much more secure for the financial institution, right? So we have come out with the Surabhi score, which is essentially an underwriting tool for the cattle, especially from a dairy perspective. So where, based on the data that we collect of the herd of the cattle, typically a farmer will qualify for a cattle loan if he has got like 2 or 3 cattle plus, it should give milk, there are different stages. So based on all this data, we essentially, again, based on data and images, we have come out with an algorithm which will essentially generate a cash flow statement, which will, and then based on the cash flow statement, health of the cattle and various other parameters, we will come out with a red, amber, green, which is a Surabhi score, right? And then this can be used along with the other underwriting tools of the financial institutions, so that it can be a STP process. And this helps in filtering much better and giving a true cattle loan to the dairy farmer, and which also becomes a much better secure way of underwriting this particular loan for in terms of the cattle loan, right? So again, all these things also uses enough AI and ML, so where the images that we get, we know that it is only that image, random images are not got, right? Typically, I'm sure, some of the KGFS team members are there, enough data points, you will have to, have an underwriter who sees whether the images are right or wrong, right? Next slide. Yeah, so this is the, next is the Android app that we have, which is the Dvara Surabhi. So where the farmers can download this app, and through this they can check the health of the cattle. Then we provide cattle specific recommendations in terms of how they can increase the milk, then feeding management, breeding management. They can chat with the vet or call the vet. Besides that, of course, we take inbound leads in terms of the different products that we sort of offer. Next slide. So this is a sort of distribution and a visualization of how the users of the Dvara Surabhi app are there. So we have put more and more focus in Tamil Nadu and Karnataka, especially in the clusters that we operate. Next slide. And as we speak, we have more than 800,000 downloads from the App Store, and more than 97,000 plus cattle have been tested for the health check, and 500,000 plus unique devices are part of the platform. So in terms of the services, like we said, see, there are a couple of challenges for the farmers, especially in terms of at the end of the day, they spend enough input and they want more and more milk, and there are also, in terms of the quality as well as in terms of the fat and SNF, which gives better returns to the farmer. And typically the farmer, though historically they learn from their past generations as well as from their neighbors in terms of how to rear cattle, enough scientific veterinary principles are not generally used. So what we have essentially taken is, so basically we have a AI-driven veterinarian who is close to one of our senior veterinarians, Dr. JTK, and we try and compare the accuracies between these two, right? The only difference being, whenever the farmer asks, the AI veterinarian can answer instantly, right? So we have modeled the brain on that and give all these recommendations to the dairy farmer as and when they sort of ask. And besides this, of course, we take enough lead generations as part of the app, so that we can especially cater to those customers in terms of if they want loan, insurance, or if they want feed. And we also have an e-commerce store that we have recently started, where the farmers can themselves sort of order mineral mixtures or a few other things that they want. And as we go forward, we will keep building the e-commerce. So yeah, thanks. So I definitely foresee as we sort of go forward, I'm sure technology in a lot of way has changed the way we operate our lives, right? Why should the dairy farmers, especially, I mean, people in the rural space, and especially coming from Dvara E-Dairy perspective, we want to ensure that the digital tools are available to the farmers as well as to the different players in the ecosystem, so that everybody sort of benefits in the ecosystem, and especially the small and medium dairy farmers. Glad to take any specific questions. Yes, so yeah, so we have in 8 languages currently, but our primary focus is in 3 languages, which is Tamil, Kannada, and Hindi. But we have actually 8 languages, yeah. So what we have broadly seen also is in terms of, normally we tend to sort of classify users in general as digital and non-digital. Our understanding, based on doing enough roadshows and, talking to multiple dairy farmers essentially is, and this is also true across all users in that sense. There is a non-digital, there is a digital, and there is a pro-digital. So pro-digital are those who are probably, who can go to the Play Store, download apps, who are reasonably tech savvy, who can sort of figure things out. There is also an age distribution there, right? Typically what we have seen is the users in the age group of 20 to 45 are generally pro-digital farmers. Again, of course, there will be enough exceptions, but I'm just trying to give a sense. So typically these users or farmers in our case go and use the app. But the digital farmers typically they use 3 apps: WhatsApp, Facebook, and YouTube, right? So in our sort of discussions, I mean, there is only one farmer out of like 100 farmers who is using Spotify. So other than that, almost every farmer, I mean, all the 100 farmers are using these 3, right? So I think the channel also matters in a huge sense, because there is no award for building something great and hoping that people will use, right? So we need to sort of put it in a place, make it as usable by the farmers or by the users in the channel that they are already comfortable and available in, right? So in that sense, we are seeing a lot of traction in the WhatsApp as well. And so we are sort of building the services that we want to sort of offer on top of the WhatsApp as well, so that enough digital farmers come in and then they sort of graduate to pro-digital. That we provide, it's either the applicant or the co-applicant is a woman. So it is 100% of the loans are given to the when the applicant or the co-applicant is women. So typically we have seen in almost every household that there is a lot of contribution, especially from the women women in the rural, and they sort of engage, and cattle in some sense is also sort of part of their family, right? So in enough cases, for example, one of the reasons we also added the feed management is because typically it is like, typically, especially in Indian culture, the amount of food you eat cooked by your mom is proportional to the amount of love, right? So in that sense. So typically they overfeed, right? So, there is a joke that they generally tend to mix pasam and payasam, right? So in some sense, they just overfeed you, right? So typically this also happens with cattle, where, it's like irrespective of the stage that it is in, or irrespective of at what level of the milking stage it is, the cattle is sort of not fed appropriately, and it is sort of common, right? So which results in a lot of complications or reduction in the milk yield and things like that. And it also increases the input cost for the farmer, which results in an overall reduction in the earnings of the farmer, right? So so our recommendations are sort of targeted towards optimizing the cost that goes in, as well as increasing the yield from the cattle in that sense. And in some sense, I would say it is not surprising that cattle is revered in our culture in that sense, where cattle also goes through a different stage in terms of that it needs to come to heat, it needs to be inseminated, right? Then it'll get pregnant and it'll start giving milk, and then there are stages, and then there is a dry period, right? And then the cycle sort of continues. So the closeness to the humans in some sense is sort of very apparent. And if we look at also our food habits, milk and milk products are sort of extremely part of all our food habits in that sense. So in almost every household in rural, they will at least keep 1 or 2 cattle for their own milk consumption, if not for using that as a sort of a revenue generating profession in that sense. So cattle and dairy in that sense is a very, very interesting space. And of course, during the COVID times as well, we had seen this has been one of the less impacted or no impact. I think all of us got our milk packets during the COVID times as well. So in that sense, it's a sort of a green segment, and so which is also good for the industry as a whole, where if in some sense it can be said that the dairy loans, especially when there are correct underwriting tools like we have, will make the loan more secure than probably, let's say, an agri loan, which is probably based on the amount of rain or seasonal or various other things that can sort of happen, right? So I think in the recent budget as well, there is enough focus on the dairy related loans and activities besides the agri. And there is also a shift in the rural, moving from this 26% or so to about 31% more towards dairy and the livestock related activities in that sense. Thank you. So yeah, if you are having cattle at home, or any of your relatives, or any farmers that feel free to bump them up with Dvara Surabhi, and please do ask them to download. Thank you.